Hey there folks, today we're going to be visiting what is my all-time favorite way to play Project Zomboid. Now, this is coming from someone with thousands of hours who plays a variety of different setups as part of my efforts for my channel, so in all that time trying different things, this has always been my favorite, and I think many of you will feel the same if you haven't tried it out yet. We'll cover the mods needed for this setup, why it's so different to the usual Project Zomboid playthrough, and how future updates are going to make this method of play even better. Now if you enjoy this video, drop it a like, or if you want to see more zombie survival stuff, subscribe to the channel and check out my other videos. So first things first, what's the premise of this setup? Quite simply, this is wilderness survival. No built up areas, just you, the woods, and what you can gather, hunt, or craft for yourself. That sort of leads into the first major topic of this video, and that's what makes this setup so different to the bog standard Project Zomboid playthrough. Now, obviously, we're not in Kentucky anymore. We're on an entirely different map, and the best I've found for this sort of playthrough so far has to be the forest. There's the odd dilapidated building out there and some more unique landmarks that I don't necessarily want to spoil for you guys, but most of the map is covered in forests and rivers. I really can't understate how this map alone makes such a huge impact on the way you'll play. With very limited buildings comes almost no loot spawns, meaning that you'll need to almost exclusively live off the land. The starting stages of a run like this are always going to be the most difficult, as you forage for supplies to make tools, containers to boil your water in, and balance this against the need for food to continue your survival efforts. Really, this setup will put you through your paces like no other. You're not going to be fighting hordes of zombies, instead you'll be fighting the elements and your environment with your knowledge of the crafting system. You'll need to carefully consider your character creation when playing this type of game mode too. Remember, with little to no skill books to be found, you'll be relying on what skills and traits you have from the character creation screen, or can learn with little to no XP modifiers. Perhaps you want to lean into foraging, since that's how you're going to be getting most of your materials for early stage crafting. Maybe you'd prefer to sink into carpentry so you're prepared to build a base with all the bells and whistles. Or perhaps you'll focus on fishing or farming to ensure a steady supply of food. You won't be able to cover everything, so consider your options carefully and pick based on how you think you'll choose to survive. The fact you can't cover all of the bases with the default sandbox settings makes this setup fantastic for multiplayer or small scale co-op too. We're running this setup on my whitelisted Patreon server at the moment, and have found this wipe has really encouraged players to work together, trade, and build settlements to share between them. Because they simply can't cover everything themselves in a reasonable amount of time, they're pushed to interact with others as a way to solve their problems. And we'll talk about this in a bit more detail later, but it's actually kind of reminiscent of what the developers are planning to do with the crafting overhaul in Build 42 in that way. It makes me look forward to that update even more, and reinforces why I think an officially supported wilderness map would be such a good idea when this crafting system hits the ground for players. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the wilderness setup and focus on some of the mods involved. If I've already sold it to you by this point in the video and you just want to give it a go, there's a link in the description to all of the mods I'd consider essential for this setup. And obviously you can add your own, but those are the ones I'd recommend to encapsulate the feeling you're alone with no crutches like zombies having usable clothes or stuff like that. Now, this mod pack adds more than one crafting mod for the purposes of making items, and more importantly tools, that you would otherwise have to find out in the world. Things like craftable backpacks, makeshift weapons, and essential tools like knives or axes. There's a whole lot more in these mods, so to help navigate all of these new options, I've added a mod known as Craft Helper to the pack. This mod allows you to right-click any item or material and search what recipes can be crafted using that item, and what other items you'd also need. It also allows for various filtering and searching that should help to identify how you might solve problems, like say having no shoes and how to craft them, or having no container to hold your water in. In a setup like this one, we're having to strap together a few different crafting mods to cover all bases effectively, and for that, something like Craft Helper is a massive help. Now, dropping into a scenario like this one would seem a little bit odd if we were to have regular survivor clothes, right? This is where Yakis Makeshift Clothing mod comes in, alongside some other mods that we commissioned especially to work in conjunction with the original. Again, all of these mods are available to the public. Yakis Makeshift Clothing essentially brings in a bunch of crafted clothing alternatives to the regular clothes that you'd find around the world in a primitive style of appearance, such as the Roman clothing set, the medieval clothing set, and the primitive clothing set. These can be crafted using various tailoring supplies, as well as berries you can forage, animal skins you can acquire through trapping, and tools that you can craft thanks to the help of our primitive crafting mods. The additional mod, That's It, I'm Weaving, which we commissioned, will allow you to find flax seeds which you can then grow and spin into fabric at a loom before using for crafting of various clothing. We also commissioned a set of tattered clothing for Yakis Makeshift Clothing mod that will spawn zombies in nothing but rags, meaning you can use their clothes for materials like ripped sheets, but otherwise they will be no use against the cold or provide any protective values. This encourages crafting your own clothing. Lastly, we had a mod made up that removes the usual clothing options on the character creation screen and replaces them with Yakis Clothing. So all the bases are covered here, and there's no way that clothes can be acquired unless you find them on some of the few loot spawns on this map. Alright, so those are the main mods that will allow this setup to work the way it does, and ultimately why I enjoy it so much as a change of pace to the vanilla version of Project Zomboid. Before we wrap this one up though, I wanted to talk about some of the changes coming in Build 42 that are going to massively support this kind of playthrough in the future, and how the developers could make this game mode even more accessible to their player base than it is right now. Now, we still don't have a date for Build 42, but we've seen significant footage of the intended crafting overhaul with a whole lot of detailed explanation about how it's going to work. We've seen footage of blacksmithing tools using materials found through scavenging, we've seen brickwork masonry, and we've seen pottery for building food containers that we otherwise would only be able to loot. The important thing about these crafting changes though is that they're being built from the ground up, with the assumption that for the first tier of crafting at least, players would not have access to any loot. Now, based on what we've been talking about so far, you can probably already see how this is going to impact a primitive style playthrough like the one I've talked about in this video. A lot of current crafting mods won't be needed, and we'll have a massive amount of additional crafting recipes. One of the major implementations will be construction of a base. Right now, we can only build wooden objects in this kind of scenario, but with the implementation of Build 42's crafting, we'll be able to gradually upgrade to bricks using a kiln and materials like clay that we can dig up from wet soil. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a small scale map that supports wilderness playthroughs just like the modded one you're seeing in the footage of this video would be a fantastic implementation. I realize adding a whole new map isn't easy, but we've seen it done with Kingsmouth, and I really don't think this kind of map has to be that complicated in the first instance either, at least nowhere near as complex as an urban environment. By adding a vanilla supported wilderness map, it will help to make primitive playthroughs like this much more viable and allow every facet of the new crafting system to be utilized in full. So yeah, devs, if you're watching this, this is something I would absolutely love to see. A wilderness map to enable that fantastic and complex crafting system that you're creating for Build 42. So that's it from me in this video, but as always, I'd love to hear from you folks at home on what you think is your favorite way to play Project Zomboid, how you feel about wilderness playthroughs like this, and most importantly, do you think we need a wilderness map to support the new crafting system? If you're interested in giving this sort of playthrough a try for yourself, there's a mod pack linked in the description of this video, or if you just want to jump in and play right away, we're hosting this setup on our multiplayer whitelisted server right now all the way through this month. You can subscribe to the Patreon for £3 a month and support our mod development, get access to our server, and play unique themes like this one every single month. Huge thank you to my existing patrons for their support, of course, and I will see all of you lovely folks in the next one.